When we think of the Middle Ages, we often picture knights in shining armor, grand castles, and epic battles. But there was another world hidden beneath the surface, a world of shadows, secrets, and lies. This was the realm of medieval spies, the unsung heroes and villains who operated in the darkest corners of history. Imagine a time when information was power, and every secret could mean life or death. In an era without modern technology, these clandestine operatives relied on wit, courage, and deception to gather intelligence, influence events, and sometimes even change the course of history. From royal courts to battlefields, from bustling towns to remote monasteries, spies were everywhere. Yet few knew their true identities. The Middle Ages were a time of constant conflict, shifting alliances, and political intrigue. Kings and queens, nobles and merchants, all needed eyes and ears in enemy territories. But being a spy wasn't just about gathering information, it was about survival. Every step, every word, every glance could reveal your true intentions. One wrong move, and you might find yourself facing torture, imprisonment, or worse. So, what did it take to be a successful spy in the Middle Ages? How did they operate in such a dangerous world? And why do their stories still fascinate us today? Let's dive into the hidden world of medieval espionage and uncover the secrets that have been buried for centuries. In the chaos of shifting kingdoms and constant warfare, information became a weapon as deadly as any sword. Long before the modern spy agencies, medieval rulers understood that knowledge could win battles, secure thrones, and destroy enemies from within. The roots of espionage lie in the feudal system itself. Kings and nobles ruled vast territories, often separated by miles of hostile land. Communication was slow, and trust was rare. To survive, leaders needed more than armies. They needed secrets. And so, they began to employ men and women who could slip through enemy lines, eavesdrop on court conversations, and uncover plots before they unfolded. One of the earliest known examples of organized espionage comes from the reign of Charlemagne in the 8th century. He sent trusted agents disguised as merchants and pilgrims across his empire. These spies reported back on corruption, rebellion, and even military readiness. Their reports helped him maintain control over a realm stretching from modern-day France to Germany. But it wasn't just kings who used spies. Nobles, city-states, and even merchant guilds relied on informants to protect their interests. In Italy, where rival families fought for dominance, espionage became an art form. The Medicis, for example, maintained a network of informants to track political rivals, business deals, and secret alliances. The Church, too, played its part. With influence spanning continents, the Vatican had its own web of agents feeding intelligence back to Rome. Some were monks, others were diplomats or traitors, each carrying coded messages hidden in religious texts or woven into tapestries. As time passed, the need for secrecy grew. Wars like the 100 Years' War and the Crusades saw spies infiltrating enemy camps, stealing battle plans, and even sabotaging supplies. A single piece of stolen intelligence could turn the tide of war. But how did these spies operate without modern tools? That's where ingenuity came in. They used invisible ink made from lemon juice or vinegar, hid messages in hollowed-out coins, and developed hand signals to communicate silently. Some memorized entire documents to avoid carrying written evidence. This was the birth of espionage, a world built on deception, loyalty, and betrayal. But behind every successful ruler, there was always someone watching from the shadows. In the world of medieval espionage, not all spies were created equal. Some worked openly under false identities, while others lived entirely in the shadows. Each type had a specific role, tailored to the needs of their employer, be it a king, a noble, or even a merchant guild. One of the most common types was the infiltrator, a spy who gained access to enemy territory by posing as someone trustworthy. These could be merchants, pilgrims, or even wandering minstrels. They would embed themselves into courts, armies, or trade routes, listening closely to conversations and memorizing secrets before slipping away unnoticed. Their survival depended on charm, deception, and an ability to disappear when needed. Then there were the scouts, often soldiers or mercenaries with knowledge of terrain and tactics. Unlike infiltrators, scouts didn't need to blend in. They needed to observe from afar. Hidden in forests, atop hills, or within enemy camps, they gathered intelligence on troop movements, fortifications, and supply lines. A single scout's report could determine whether an army marched to victory or walked straight into an ambush. More dangerous still were the double agents, those who worked for both sides. These individuals played a deadly game, feeding just enough truth to each party to maintain trust, while secretly serving one master. The risk was immense. If discovered, betrayal meant execution, torture, or worse, public humiliation before death. Yet, some of the most effective intelligence operations relied on these men and women who danced between loyalties like performers on a tightrope. There were also couriers, tasked with transporting secret messages across dangerous lands. These weren't always professional spies. Sometimes they were monks, traitors, or even servants who carried coded letters hidden in wax seals, hollowed-out walking sticks, or woven into tapestries. A single intercepted message could unravel years of planning. Even children played a role. In royal courts, young pages and servants were often used to overhear private conversations. Too young to be seen as a threat, they could move freely between rooms, collecting whispers that might shape the fate of nations. Women, too, were essential to the world of espionage. Often underestimated, they could move through social circles undetected. Noble women hosted gatherings where secrets spilled over wine, and servant girls cleaned rooms filled with confidential documents. Many female spies became legends, silent observers who knew more than any king dared admit. But perhaps the most feared were the assassin spies, warriors trained not only to gather information, but to eliminate targets when necessary. These were the silent killers who struck under cover of darkness, leaving no trace but a lifeless body and unanswered questions. Each of these roles required skill, courage, and a willingness to live a lie. And in the Middle Ages, lies were sometimes the only way to survive. In a world without smartphones, satellites, or encrypted emails, medieval spies had to rely on clever tools and techniques that were both simple and effective. Their survival depended on how well they could hide information, pass messages undetected, and disappear before anyone suspected the truth. One of the most common methods was invisible ink. Agents used substances like lemon juice, vinegar, milk, or even urine to write secret messages between the lines of ordinary letters. When heated over a flame, the hidden text would appear like magic. A seemingly innocent letter from a merchant about grain prices might reveal enemy troop movements to those who knew where to look. Spies also developed coded language, often using substitution ciphers or numerical systems. Some relied on book codes, where specific words from a shared book were referenced by page and line number. Without the matching book, the message was useless to outsiders. Others used symbolic gestures, such as adjusting a hat or tapping a belt, to signal danger or confirmation during meetings in crowded places. But perhaps the most ingenious tool was the hollow coin, a regular-looking piece of currency with a tiny compartment inside. Messages, poison capsules, or even miniature maps could be hidden within. These coins were passed unnoticed through checkpoints and customs, carrying secrets worth more than gold. Another method involved wax seals. Important documents were sealed with wax bearing official insignias, making them appear legitimate. But some spies embedded tiny scrolls inside the wax itself, only visible when melted down. This allowed for secure communication between trusted allies without raising suspicion. For longer journeys, spies carried hidden compartments in clothing and footwear. Hollowed-out walking sticks, belts with false linings, and double-bottom satchels were all used to transport sensitive materials across dangerous territories. Some spies didn't carry anything at all. They memorized everything. Trusted agents trained their minds to remember complex details, from battle plans to names of informants. This ensured that even if caught, no physical evidence could be found on them. And then there were the secret meeting spots. From underground tunnels beneath castles to secluded forest clearings, spies arranged encounters in places where few others would think to look. Some used coded knocks at tavern doors or whispered phrases in confessionals to arrange these covert meetings. These tools and tricks weren't just clever, they were essential. In a time where discovery meant death, every advantage counted. And medieval spies mastered the art of deception long before modern espionage ever existed. History remembers kings and queens, knights and conquerors, but rarely do we hear about those who shaped events from the shadows. Yet some of the most influential figures in medieval history were spies whose names never made it into official records. One of the earliest known masterminds of espionage was Harold Godwin's son, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England. Before his fateful battle at Hastings in 1066, Harold deployed a network of informants across Normandy to track Duke William's military preparations. His agents disguised themselves as merchants and monks, gathering intelligence on troop movements and supply routes. Though he ultimately lost the throne, his use of covert operations proved ahead of its time. In Renaissance Italy, where political intrigue was as common as pasta, Francesco Guicciardini, a Florentine diplomat and historian, maintained an elaborate spy system. He relied on coded letters, secret meetings, and even bribed foreign officials to keep Florence one step ahead of its rivals. His reports were so detailed that modern historians still study them for insight into medieval politics. But perhaps the most legendary female spy of the Middle Ages was Catherine de' Medici, often called the Black Queen. During the 16th century, she ruled France through her sons and orchestrated one of the most sophisticated spy networks ever seen. She trained young women, beautiful, charming, and deadly, to seduce noblemen, priests, and diplomats. These flying squadron members extracted secrets in bedchambers and whispered them back to Catherine, who used the information to manipulate the French court. Meanwhile, in England, Sir Francis Walsingham became the father of modern espionage under Queen Elizabeth I. Though technically a Renaissance figure, his methods had deep medieval roots. He created a web of informants across Europe, intercepting messages, breaking codes, and infiltrating Catholic plots against the Protestant queen. His most famous success was uncovering the Babington Plot, which led to the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Even before Walsingham, English kings like Edward III employed spies during the Hundred Years' War. One such agent, John Arundel, posed as a wandering minstrel while gathering intelligence on French fortifications. He once escaped capture by jumping off a castle wall into a river below, an act so daring it became legend. In Spain, during the Reconquista, Christian and Muslim rulers both used spies to gain the upper hand. The Castilian king Henry II famously employed Don Pero Niño, a nobleman and warrior who also acted as a double agent. He would ride into enemy camps pretending to defect, only to return with crucial intelligence. And then there was Thomas Philippes, a cryptographer who worked alongside Walsingham. He could break any code within hours and even developed invisible ink techniques himself. His work helped dismantle countless plots against Elizabeth, making him one of the most effective spies of his time. These weren't just individuals. They were silent architects of history. Their actions determined who rose to power, who fell, and how wars ended. And yet, their stories remain hidden beneath the grand narratives of kings and battles. When we think of spies in the Middle Ages, we often picture men in dark cloaks slipping through castle corridors or hiding in taverns. But some of the most effective and daring spies were women, silent observers who used their positions to gather secrets that shaped history. Unlike male spies, who had to sneak into places, many women were already inside where the real conversations happened. Noble women hosted banquets, attended court meetings, and moved freely among powerful figures. Their presence was expected, but their ears were sharp. A single whispered conversation over wine could reveal plans for war, betrayal within the court, or hidden alliances. One of the most famous examples is Isabeau of Bavaria, Queen of France in the early 15th century. While often dismissed as a passive figure, she played a crucial role in political maneuvering during the Hundred Years' War. She maintained connections with both French and English courts, gathering intelligence and passing it on through trusted messengers. Her position allowed her to hear secrets others could only dream of uncovering. In Italy, noble women like Isabella d'Este were not just patrons of the arts. They were masterminds of political strategy. Isabella ran a vast network of informants across Europe, using letters filled with coded language and invisible ink. She knew that knowledge was power, and she wielded it carefully, ensuring her influence extended far beyond her own court. Even among the lower classes, women found ways to participate in espionage. Servants and maids cleaned rooms filled with confidential documents, listened at keyholes, and carried messages between masters and mistresses. Some were paid for their silence, while others acted out of loyalty or revenge. Women also served as couriers, moving through cities unnoticed while carrying secret letters hidden in their clothing or hair. Unlike soldiers or knights, they weren't searched as thoroughly. A woman traveling alone was rarely seen as suspicious until it was too late. Some female spies went even further. In England, during the reign of Elizabeth I, Mary, Queen of Scots, relied heavily on female agents to pass messages to her supporters. These women risked everything, knowing that if caught, they would face execution for treason. And then there were those who operated entirely in the shadows. Women whose names were never recorded, but whose actions changed the fate of kingdoms. They were mothers, wives, and daughters who listened, remembered, and reported. In a world where women were often silenced, they found power in what others ignored. These women weren't just assistants in the world of espionage. They were essential players. And their stories remind us that sometimes the most dangerous spies are the ones no one suspects. Being a spy in the Middle Ages was not just dangerous. It was often a death sentence waiting to happen. Unlike modern intelligence agents who operate with technology, training, and sometimes diplomatic immunity, medieval spies had only their wits, disguises, and sheer luck to protect them. The biggest threat was discovery. If caught, there were no Geneva Conventions, no prisoner rights, and certainly no plea bargains. Instead, captured spies faced some of the most brutal punishments imaginable, often designed not just to kill, but to terrify anyone watching. One of the most feared fates was torture. Inquisitors and jailers had an entire toolkit at their disposal. Iron maidens lined with spikes, thumb screws that crushed fingers one by one, and the rack, a device that stretched limbs until joints dislocated. Confession under torture was almost guaranteed, whether the accused was guilty or not. But even after confessing, execution was still inevitable. In England, spies found guilty of treason faced a particularly gruesome end known as drawing and quartering. The condemned would be dragged through the streets, tied to a horse, hanged until nearly dead, then disemboweled while still alive. Their body was then chopped into 4 pieces, and their head placed on a spike for public display. Even if a spy avoided such a fate, imprisonment itself was a slow death. Medieval dungeons were dark, damp pits where prisoners were chained to walls without food, sanitation, or light. Disease ran rampant. Lice, rats, and starvation were constant companions. Guards rarely fed inmates. They relied on family members to bring food. Without it, death came slowly from hunger, infection, or madness. Public humiliation was another common punishment. Spies caught in civilian areas might be locked in stocks, where townspeople hurled rotten food, rocks, or worse. Others were branded, blinded, or had their ears cut off to mark them forever as traitors. Some were subjected to trial by ordeal, a so-called divine test of guilt. One method involved plunging a hand into boiling water to retrieve an object. If the wound healed cleanly in 3 days, they were innocent. If not, God had judged them guilty, and execution followed. But perhaps the worst danger wasn't physical. It was psychological. Living a double life meant never knowing who could betray you. A single slip of the tongue, a wrong glance, or a poorly timed question could expose everything. And once exposed, there was no escape. So why do people do it? For power, for money, for survival. Some were forced into espionage by rulers who demanded loyalty at any cost. Others saw it as the only way to rise above their station. Whatever the reason, every spy knew the risks. And yet, they stepped into the shadows anyway. Because in the world of medieval espionage, secrets were more valuable than gold, and just as deadly. Some of the most dramatic moments in medieval history were shaped not by swords or treaties, but by whispers, hidden messages, and spies who risked everything to change the course of events. Take the 100 Years' War, a brutal conflict between England and France that stretched for over a century. It wasn't just battles that decided its outcome, it was intelligence. Both sides relied on spies embedded deep within enemy territory. English commanders used infiltrators disguised as French merchants to gather information about troop movements and castle defenses. In return, the French developed counter-espionage networks, training their own agents to detect and eliminate these foreign threats. One of the most daring operations occurred during the Siege of Orleans in 1428. The city was under heavy siege by English forces when a secret message needed to reach Charles VII, the Dauphin of France. A spy dressed as a peasant managed to smuggle out detailed reports about the fortifications and supply lines, eventually leading to the arrival of reinforcements and the legendary presence of Joan of Arc. In England, during the War of the Roses, espionage became essential to survival. With rival factions constantly shifting power, noble families needed eyes everywhere. The Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, maintained an extensive spy network that influenced court decisions and even orchestrated royal marriages. His agents moved through castles and villages alike, uncovering plots before they could be acted upon. But perhaps one of the most dangerous times for spies was during the Crusades, when religious wars pitted Christian knights against Muslim warriors across the Holy Land. Spies from both sides infiltrated each other's armies, sometimes posing as mercenaries or captured soldiers. Some crusaders were secretly in contact with Muslim leaders, negotiating safe passage or revealing weaknesses in enemy strongholds. One of the most effective spy masters of this era was Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. He employed a network of informants known as the Silent Eyes, men and women who moved unnoticed between camps, reporting back on enemy strategies. His intelligence allowed him to defeat the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin, where he captured the king of Jerusalem himself. Even within the church, espionage played a role in shaping history. The Papal States had their own covert operatives who monitored political rivals and protected the Pope from assassination attempts. These spies operated in shadows, passing coded messages hidden in religious texts or carried by monks who traveled freely between kingdoms. Wars weren't the only place where spies changed history. Assassinations and betrayals were often the result of secret intelligence gathering. One of the most infamous examples was the gunpowder plot. Although technically Renaissance era, it built on the traditions of medieval espionage. Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators nearly succeeded in blowing up the English Parliament until a leak revealed their plans. These stories show that spies didn't just work behind closed doors. They shaped the fate of empires. Whether preventing war, securing victory, or orchestrating betrayal, their influence ran deeper than any battlefield. In the world of medieval espionage, deception was often more powerful than truth. While gathering intelligence was crucial, sometimes the most effective weapon a spy could wield was a carefully crafted lie. Misinformation and disinformation were tools used by kings, generals, and spies alike to manipulate enemies, create confusion, and gain the upper hand in battles and political struggles. One of the simplest yet most effective tactics was spreading false rumors. A single whispered story about a king's illness or a nobleman's betrayal could destabilize an entire court. In some cases, spies didn't even need to act. They simply planted an idea and let paranoia do the rest. Nobles would turn on each other, alliances would crumble, and rulers would waste resources chasing ghosts. During wartime, fake battle plans were commonly used to mislead enemy commanders. Spies would allow themselves to be captured with forged documents that suggested an army was heading in one direction when, in reality, it was moving elsewhere. This tactic was especially useful during sieges and invasions, where surprise was often the deciding factor. Another method involved forging letters between rival factions. A forged love letter between two noblemen's wives could spark jealousy and war. A fake alliance agreement between two enemy kingdoms could force a third ruler into a desperate preemptive strike. These manipulations were not just clever, they were deadly. Some spies went even further, pretending to defect. They would walk into enemy camps claiming to have valuable information, feeding their hosts just enough truth to earn trust before delivering a final, devastating falsehood. One such case occurred during the 100 Years' War, when a French agent pretended to switch sides and convince the English to divert troops away from a key stronghold, only for the real French forces to attack it unopposed. Even battlefield tactics relied heavily on deception. Fake retreats were common, where armies would pretend to flee only to lure pursuers into an ambush. Campfires were lit in empty fields to make it seem like soldiers were resting nearby, while the Real army moved under cover of darkness. Some spies disguised themselves as messengers carrying orders that led enemy units straight into traps. Religious figures weren't immune to these tactics either. During the Crusades, both Christian and Muslim leaders spread stories of divine intervention to boost morale or demoralize the opposition. Reports of miraculous visions, ghostly apparitions, or holy relics appearing on the battlefield were often nothing more than propaganda designed to influence the minds of soldiers. The greatest danger of disinformation wasn't just in its ability to trick enemies. It was in how easily it could backfire. Once a lie was released, it became impossible to control. It could lead to unintended wars, betrayals, or even the downfall of those who had created it in the first place. In the end, medieval espionage wasn't just about uncovering secrets. It was about shaping them. And sometimes, the most dangerous weapon wasn't a sword or poison, but a well-placed lie. In the world of medieval espionage, betrayal was a currency, and discovery meant death. Once a spy was caught, there was no trial by jury, no plea bargain, only interrogation, torture, and execution. The only question was how long they could hold out before revealing what they knew. Some spies were lucky enough to be killed quickly. Others weren't so fortunate. The most feared fate was being handed over to an inquisitor or royal torturer, where the goal wasn't just confession, it was suffering. The rack, thumbscrews, iron maidens, and burning pincers were all tools of the trade, designed to break even the most hardened agents. One of the most infamous cases involved Guy Fawkes. Though technically Renaissance era, his capture followed medieval traditions of brutal interrogation. When he was discovered with barrels of gunpowder beneath the English Parliament, he was taken to the Tower of London and tortured until he revealed every name in the plot. His final confession came after days of unbearable pain, proving that even the most loyal spies had their limits. But not all spies were caught through betrayal or carelessness. Some were undone by the very lies they told. Double agents often found themselves trapped between masters, unable to satisfy both sides. A single inconsistency in a report, a misplaced word in a letter, or a wrong answer to a casual question could unravel years of deception. Once exposed, punishment was always public. Spies were not simply executed. They were made examples. In France, captured English agents were sometimes dragged through the streets before being hanged, drawn, and quartered. Their bodies were displayed on city walls, warning others of the consequences of treason. In Italy, where political intrigue was rampant, spies who failed were often poisoned discreetly. A glass of wine laced with arsenic was preferable to public disgrace, especially for those connected to powerful families like the Medicis or Borgias. Even if a spy managed to escape immediate capture, paranoia followed them everywhere. Every glance became suspicious, every stranger a potential informant. Many lived in constant fear, changing identities, fleeing from town to town, knowing that one slip could end everything. Some tried to retire, hoping to disappear into obscurity. But secrets have a way of resurfacing. A former spy might live peacefully for years, only to be recognized by someone from the past. A merchant, a noble, or even a former lover. And then, the game would begin again. Because in the world of medieval espionage, the only true escape was death. The world of medieval spies may seem like a distant relic of the past, but their influence stretches far into the present. The techniques they developed, coded messages, invisible ink, double agents, and misinformation campaigns, laid the foundation for modern espionage. Long before the CIA or MI6 existed, medieval rulers understood that information was power. Kings, queens, and generals relied on networks of informants to stay ahead of enemies, manipulate politics, and protect their thrones. These early intelligence operations were not just about gathering secrets. They were about shaping history from the shadows. One of the most lasting legacies of medieval espionage is the concept of state-sponsored intelligence. Before this era, spying was often an individual effort. Mercenaries, thieves, or opportunists who sold secrets for gold. But during the Middle Ages, governments began organizing formal spy networks, employing professionals trained in deception, cryptography, and surveillance. This system evolved into what we now recognize as intelligence agencies. The Renaissance-era spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham, who worked under Queen Elizabeth I, built upon medieval traditions to create one of the first structured intelligence services. His methods, intercepting letters, breaking codes, and infiltrating enemy groups, would later inspire modern agencies like MI6 and the FBI. Even the idea of counter-espionage has its roots in the Middle Ages. Rulers learned that if they could gather intelligence, so could their enemies. This led to the development of secret police, censors, and loyalty tests designed to root out traitors. Some monarchs even created fake spy rings to lure real ones into exposing themselves. Beyond government, the tactics of medieval spies influenced business, diplomacy, and warfare. Merchants used coded language to protect trade secrets. Diplomats sent encrypted letters across borders. And military leaders continued using deception as a weapon long after the fall of feudalism. Perhaps most surprisingly, medieval espionage shaped popular culture. From Shakespeare's political intrigues to modern spy novels and films, the image of the clever informant, the mysterious double agent, and the master manipulator all trace their origins back to the shadowy figures of the Middle Ages. These spies operated without the benefit of modern technology, relying only on wit, courage, and cunning. They risked everything to uncover truths that could shift the balance of power. And though their names were often erased from history, their impact remains undeniable. So next time you watch a spy movie or read a thriller filled with coded messages and hidden betrayals, remember, you're witnessing echoes of a tradition that began centuries ago in a world where every whisper carried the weight of life or death. Medieval spies were more than just shadowy figures lurking in castles and taverns. They were the architects of secrets that shaped history. Their world was one of deception, danger, and daring. They risked everything for information that could change the fate of kingdoms, and yet their names are rarely remembered. Unlike knights who charged into battle or kings who ruled from thrones, spies worked in silence. Their victories were unseen, their sacrifices unspoken. But without them, wars might have been lost, betrayals might have gone unnoticed, and empires might have crumbled under the weight of ignorance. What makes medieval espionage so fascinating is how much it mirrors modern intelligence work. The same principles still apply: gathering information, breaking codes, infiltrating enemy lines, manipulating truth. The only difference is the tools. Where once a spy used invisible ink and wax seals, today's agents rely on encrypted messages and satellite surveillance. But the core remains the same. Knowledge is power. And yet, there's something uniquely compelling about the medieval version. It wasn't just about national security, it was about survival. A single mistake could mean death. There were no diplomatic protections, no escape routes, no safe houses. Just courage, cunning, and the ability to disappear before anyone suspected the truth. We remember these spies not because they were always successful, but because they dared to operate in a world where discovery meant destruction. They weren't just gathering intelligence. They were playing a deadly game where every move mattered. So the next time you hear a story about a secret agent or read a novel filled with political intrigue, remember, you're witnessing the legacy of those who came before. The medieval spies who changed history from the shadows. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden world of medieval espionage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another deep dive into history's darkest secrets. See you in the next video.